I think that's what we get wrong, is that we think that we're supposed to figure out a science puzzle or achieve certain things or get to a certain place in our lives or defer it until some whatever it is algorithm that we've created in our brains. We'll never get to it. It's here. It's in this moment. And if you don't do it, you're going to die unhappy. 100% guarantee.
Harmon on percussion, solo.
Welcome to episode 42 of the Alfalfa podcast. Please keep that, Giorgio. That reminds me of the GOAT episode.
The audience is
so
gonna
much.
hate that.
No, I think it was good. And why Steven was doing that was because Top Gun Maverick is a place of happiness for you.
Oh, yeah. So good.
Pure happiness. This is a great movie.
So good.
And sometimes it can be as simple as a movie. And that's literally what we're here to talk about. I would argue that we're here to talk about the most important matter in life.
More important than metal learning?
You could argue that nothing else matters that we've talked about yet. I think this might actually be the most important topic yet. So there's so much to uncover about this topic. Eric, you're a cheerful guy. I consider you a happy man. I'd love for you to talk to me about happiness.
Yeah, guys. I would say I'm the happiest of all of us. Let's be honest.
No argument from me.
I'm just kidding. Happiness, the topic, is phenomenal. And I was just talking to a good friend of mine. You guys all know him, Roberto. We were talking about this idea of happiness because he has a family member, an uncle, who retired at age 40. He was a dentist. You know, we've talked about this path, right? Like
the
in
most
the past.
efficient profession.
Yeah, you get this like pathway to like high income, and then this family member of his, he retired at age 45. He never had any children. He has a spouse who he loves, and you know what they did for the next 35 years?
Travel.
No, just had good days.
Oh.
That's it. So my question with Roberto, as we discussed this topic, it was like, is that enough? 35 years of good days? Is that happiness? And Roberto's comment was like, it's more than anybody else could ask for, right? It's pretty good. Pretty good.
So he literally lived the no bad days slogan.
The no bad days.
Just for
but
35 years.
then on the other hand, like where I come from is like, you have this idea of fulfillment and completeness. And it's like, well, is that truly a version of happiness? Like I could personally live 35 years of no bad days just playing FIFA in at 10 a.m. and then like hanging out with you guys from like 2 p.m. to 5, and then like
2 p.m. to 2:15 p.m.
yeah, and then back to FIFA. Then Mina from 7 to 9. No, I'm joking because like the idea that we discussed was like, is happiness, can happiness be achieved via just like this really surface level, no bad days type of vibe, or does it require this level of fulfillment and real deep level completeness to achieve the idea of happiness? And I think that's the most interesting framing of this conversation. And I'll leave it to you guys to like discuss further from here. But like I have my own take, and I would like it to come back to me. But I think like everyone can be sort of happy, you know, in their lives. Clearly, like I think everybody you'd ask, like, are you happy? They'd be like, yeah, happy enough. But like, what gets you over the edge? And then, you know, like, even then, like, say you get to your goal, then what? You know, like there's a lot of nuance behind just like achievement or even fulfillment. So that's what I'll leave you guys with, and I can't wait for it to come back to me because like I have a lot more.
Noted. I mean, I think this whole question about like how to achieve happiness is kind of fucked. I think it's a setup. I think it's a setup for failure, because you're implying that like you can be happy all the time, right? And I don't think that's true. Like I think that you can be unhappy if you mourn the loss of a loved one. You can be unhappy if you get fired, right? That's not a happy moment, and that would not be a good day. If the merge failed, that would be a bad day. And I don't think you could be so happy in those days. So I think it's like a false goal to achieve. And other people have said this, but like I truly do believe, and I try to like use this word in my goals and everything I do, is like peace is the better like emotion to strive for other than happiness. Because peace can be achieved in all states of being. You can obviously have peace when you're happy. But you can also be at peace with loss sometimes. And you can be at peace with failure. And so to me, peace is what people are actually looking for. They want something sustainable that can like persist throughout life, that is a little more foolproof. And happiness is not that. There are so many trips. And as you get older, life presents more and more problems and they become more significant. And I think like choosing happiness over peace is kind of foolhardy. And so there may be other emotions that people could strive for, but I find for me, peace is the one that resonates with me the most. And, I always like on some of my paintings, I've always written like peace and adventure because I want both those in my life. If I had to like choose, I want peace at all times, like inner peace is I guess what I'm saying. And then I want adventure along with that.
That's very interesting. I'm going to come back to you.
Okay. All right. But anyway, that's my like initial thoughts on this whole thing about like what should we strive for.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something I wanted to talk about, which is that when people say they want happiness, I think what they really mean is they want contentment. Because I feel like happiness, by definition, is almost like ephemeral, right? It's like a temporary state of like, I don't know, mini euphoria or something. But it's not like you can't be happy all the time, like unless your brain is literally broken. But you can be content all the time, and I think it's just sort of synonymous with what you're saying, is that's what we are striving for. But I kind of like the word peace a little better now that I think about it, because I feel like that is really what I want.
I think as long as people find whatever language resonates with them the most, but like with the underlying thing being like this is sustainable, like you could have peace in the ups and the downs.
Well, I think why it's important is I think if you really understand that what you're searching for is contentment versus being happy, I feel like it would guide different decisions, right? Like buying that new Lambo makes you happy for a while, but it doesn't make you content. And if you latch onto this idea of happiness as being this feeling of feeling good about something, and you think, oh, I need to do this all the time, this is what happiness is, you sort of unwittingly get into this like addiction loop where you get high a little bit by buying something or doing something, you get a little shot of dopamine, feel good, and then it goes away. And you go, why did that go away? And you go, I must need more of it. I must need a faster car, a bigger car. I need more things. I need a hotter girlfriend. I need a bigger house. You keep raising the bar, and you think you're traveling to happiness, but you're just sort of like getting higher and higher and higher and having progressively larger and larger and larger crashes and withdrawals.
Bliss, dopamine hits is really what that is. Okay, so the weed is working. That's the first thing.
I'm on high as fuck.
No, like I'm like a 2 out of 10. It just started creeping in.
Let's get you to a 3.5.
I'm going to get to a 3.54 by the end of this episode.
Okay.
It's a very light device, but it's doing its thing. So I think that the majority of like pop culture psychology around happiness has been focused on probably, well, first of all, they're just remixing and milking and bullshitting everybody to sell books. Like that's the majority. But like the best happiness science probably comes from like the Flow guys and Martin Seligman and the creators of positive psychology as a whole. Like the idea of happiness didn't exist. Like
really?
Yeah. Like, I mean, the idea of that is like an aspirational thing.
To study and understand.
Yeah, and understand the mechanics of like what creates that. Like, sure, people were like, I'm happy and all that kind of stuff. But like, psychology was mostly just like, how do we solve mental health issues and depression and anxiety and schizophrenia? And then it became like, well, what would it look like to apply this stuff toward positive psychology, flow, happiness states? I think that we all at this table agree that around the semantics issue, that like happiness, the way that like most people talk about it, is this like unsustainable thing that is kind of a sham. But where I think that would be most interesting, at least for me, is around this idea of like insert the word that makes the most sense for you, whether it be contentment or peace or joy or gratitude or whatever it might be. But it's something that you can choose to do. And you can do this and find this place in the face of the chaos of the world, regardless of what is going on. I think that's important. And that's what everyone is really aiming for. They're aiming for the peace. They're aiming for the contentment. They're aiming for whatever word it is in their language, because language also is a bit of a barrier here, right? Because the same words mean different things across different languages. So like the word happy is like a very American English construct as well, that probably doesn't exist in other languages. I know it doesn't exist in other languages. So, and if it doesn't exist in the language, then it doesn't exist in the person's reality. Like the words create the reality.
Does it exist in Farsi?
Yeah. Khoshal.
Is happiness?
It's kind of, it's happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
I'm
curious.
happy. Yeah. And so where I land on
I'm
this
glad you
idea-
know that, because you got to speak Farsi at my wedding. I'm so glad you know that word. Thank you.
Should I drop that word at the wedding? I know you're all here and very khoshal. So I'll give my, like, with that said, I think that the thing that I always got wrong and now I've gotten right about happiness, and what I try to remind myself constantly is that, and I'm using happiness now as the word that we are aspiring toward. It's like a good catch-all, right? Happiness is a choice. This is the number one most fundamental thing I think people get wrong about happiness. I think that people believe that things need to happen in order for them to be happy. Let's like dumb it down to the basics. And what we fail to realize is that we have absolute 100% agency over our happiness. And yet we sit and we whine and we moan and we point to God or the gods, and we point to the tragedy, we point to the loss, and we say, woe is me. And to even suggest such a thing feels disrespectful to my own self, to my own past self, and so many times in my life that I can look back on like tremendous suffering and loss, losing my best friend, waking up to that phone call. How am I supposed to be happy in the face of that? How do you wake up to the loss of a loved one in no matter what and be happy? That's where things get very complicated for people. But I think that even in the face, if I even may dare say so, in the face of like tragedy, in the face of trauma, in the face of the most insane things that can happen that are just purely conditions of life, these are natural laws and orders and events that are inevitable in life, I believe we can still choose this thing that we call happiness. I call it fulfillment. I think that's the word that works best for me. But I think that's what we get wrong, is that we think that we're supposed to figure out a science puzzle or achieve certain things or get to a certain place in our lives or defer it until some whatever it is algorithm that we've created in our brains. We'll never get to it. It's here. It's in this moment. And if you don't do it, you're going to die unhappy. 100% guarantee.
Bingo, bro. I love you for that.
Well,
Nice job.
thank Mother
yeah.
Ganja. No,
Yeah.
that's the truth that's inside of. That's the truth that's inside of
2.5
me.
high.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see how anything else. Everything else feels like just a sham to me, like
Okay.
chasing a fucking rainbow.
So what I loved about what you said most is that like it's choice. Like life is going to happen at the same time as you or to you or whatever. It's like simultaneous, right? It's like
Right.
it's happening to you or you're
And you're
doing
doing
life. But you always have the ability to feel a certain way about that experience, right? And you can choose. You can
It's the
choose.
only
That's the only thing you
choice
can. It's the only thing
and control you
it's
have.
The only thing you can do is choose how you want to feel
You have
in that
agency
moment.
over nothing else.
But you're telling me, in light of like losing a best friend or losing a family member, that in that moment there's choice, and even though it is like one of the worst things that could happen in the human experience, that you would choose to be happy? Because that's the part that I get what you guys are saying, but this is the part that like doesn't align with
Totally. And I think there's important nuance there. I think that is the hardest part. What has been the hardest part for me is like, in the face of tremendous human suffering, what do you call that? Is that happiness? No, it's not that happiness. It isn't a positive, blissful state.
Yeah, because you don't even want to be happy in those
You're
scenarios.
dying
Like,
inside.
yeah.
You even are experiencing a bit of a death yourself. You're probably even contemplating your own mortality and the fact that you might die. And like so many things rush through a person's mind when they're experiencing that level of loss. I think what you can choose is not to fall into a deep black hole of despair. I think what you can choose is gratitude. I think you can choose to focus on the memories that you have. And there's so many things that you could do in that moment. Now, that doesn't mean, and here's where I think it's really, really, really important. That doesn't mean that when I say happiness is a choice, that all moments should be happy. So to Nick's point, I think if you've gone through a loss, you might go through weeks, months, or years of not feeling like yourself and being truly unhappy. And that's just what's going to happen, because that's the time that you need to process that and grieve that. And these things feel like they're in opposition to one another. But I think that different people need different amounts of time to then move past a certain state to say, what is the significance of this? How can I actually like find a place of some type of memory of gratitude?
Are you saying the same thing?
No,
Okay.
but I really like your messaging, because I think that's important.
How
And
do we deal? I mean, I think it's a really fundamentally deep, challenging
I
question.
I
How
feel
do
like
we deal with trauma?
I
and
actually
loss?
feel like we're getting a little too lost in the downside, because what I want to talk about is happiness, and where I'm framing this from, as the circle comes back to me now, is like how I think about it, and how I think about happiness is it's not through loss. Like, loss exists, right, and you have to process that as it comes. And like for the guy who has 35 years of good days, there's certainly like not as good days involved, right?
Yeah.
But like at least that guy has like in his 35 years of good days has like had the freedom of choice, has like chosen who he hangs out with, etc. Like there are like better versions than worse versions of his days, regardless of like what hits him. Okay. And I don't really want to focus on that so much. Like what I actually have really distilled from this is like happiness doesn't exist so much in absolute terms, but in relative terms. And this for me is huge. I want to focus on this. I think that happiness exists relative to your expectation. And all of happiness is managing the actuals, meaning like your actual experience, against your expectation. And I think this is actually right. And my thought on this is like, you know, like as people get more wealthy, they're thinking like, oh, well, I'm going to get more happy. It's like, well, maybe. It depends on your expectation level. As people get like a spouse or like a significant other, I'm going to get more happy. Well, it depends on your expectation. Like how you expect life to prevail, the actuals are measured against that, and that determines your happiness. So for me, the definition of happiness is actually how life unfolds to you against what you expect out of life.
Relative to your benchmark.
Relative to your
Real
benchmark.
alpha. Happiness is the alpha.
Happiness is the actual
Is
alfalfa.
that the same as acceptance to you, or different?
Acceptance, I think, is it can play in two roles. One role, acceptance can play into the actual side.
Yeah.
You know, like as life is happening to you, like, oh shit, well, this was the human experience. But it can also happen on the expectation side. Like, did I expect my best friend to live until he was 95 or 105 or 155? You know, like, and as this guy dies at a young age, you're like, well, motherfucker, like that challenged my expectation.
Yeah.
So as I look at happiness at a large scale, I actually think it is simply this. Can you manage life as you are living and as it comes to you versus your expectation of life. And I think this talks to the Lamborghini. I think it talks to the best friend. I think it talks to, the loved one. Like, it's all about how do you expect life to happen to you,
Okay.
and how is the
I'm
actual.
glad I asked you that question because we fundamentally agree. Like, here's what I wrote it. I wrote it in different words, but like my formula, that the best way I've been able to distill it is like pursuit of a future and aim within that contains challenge, because without it we atrophy, while you have peace and acceptance of the presence and what is, regardless of how life shows up for you, which I think is basically what you just said.
Yeah, I'd agree that you guys are kind of on the same plane.
Because some people, happiness to them and where they long for more is their presence junkies. They're like kind of hippie, right? In the sense that they're just like overly focused on the present. And then other people, and what do they lack? They lack challenge. They lack any place in their lives where there's creativity, pursuit of more, grit, persistence of creation, anything. They never even get to see what their potential is. And then you have the other side where all they're doing is trying to see what their potential is. What can I achieve? What can I do? And then they're constantly battling the acceptance of the present. It's not the way I fucking thought it would be. I knew it was going to be better. I should be better. I feel guilty about how it should be. And there's this or everything that's showing up is not to my liking. I've been through that. We all go through that to a certain degree. And then you sit there and you have to catch yourself. And that's where the acceptance piece comes in. So I was curious for you if it's acceptance, but I think acceptance is one side of that equation for sure.
Definitely. And the reason why I said I want to come back to Nick is because we've had this conversation a decade ago, maybe more. He won't even remember this conversation.
Oh.
But Nick did tell me one time, he says, I think happiness is growth. A quote by Nick. And I never forgot it. And the way that I put it in my framework is like, you're constantly, like if you're an achiever mindset, you're constantly having your expectation level rising. And then you want to grow into that expectation, and then you're going to have your expectation level rise from there and grow into that expectation and like keep that path going. And that can feel like happiness. If you just hit your achievement and then just let it stagnate, then to Nick's point 10 years ago, like that doesn't feel, that lack of growth doesn't feel like happiness.
In Western society, I would argue the one we need to cultivate more is the acceptance and the presence. We're very good at the achievement, the pursuit of more, the big aims. We're exposed to that. I know we don't celebrate it like we used to, but like every model of life is based on like, how can I be more like these great artists, these great thinkers, these great scientists, these great entrepreneurs? It isn't like a bunch of people walking around that are archetypal examples of like acceptance and presence. So then you're forced to kind of like cultivate that in yourself and figure out how to do that for yourself.
Good point.
And there's no plan.
And we
there's no
we don't
system
like,
for that.
We don't build up happiness experts necessarily. We build up like financial success experts or whatever.
Who's richest?
Yeah. So like we've all traveled the world, and I went to the jungle in Peru, right? Like literally the Amazon River. And I was playing soccer with these guys that have never seen the internet in their lives or never seen electricity even. And they were happy as a fucking clam to literally play soccer with me or without me. They're just like happy. And I'm like, oh, well, their expectation level is I want to go play soccer, and now I'm doing it, and it's fucking rad.
And so reality is a tunnel, right? And so this formula that you and I have talked about and we put in different words, I think is the version of happiness that exists in the West. The reason that it is that is because we have all these examples of growth and more and achievement. And we feel better when we grow, when we progress. Like for sure, chemically, we literally feel better in our brains when we unlock something, when we learn something, when we achieve something, when we're noticed for something, recognize significance, all of that helps us. But like in places that we've traveled, or like in my example of like Cambodia, where I felt like I met the happiest people in the world, their pursuit of more was not much more. So the only thing they were focused on was acceptance and presence. That's what they cultivated more than anything. I think at the end of the day, it is, I would assume we all agree, I'm curious if we don't agree, a very subjective thing. the pursuit of happiness, or at least the attainment of it, and what it looks like is extremely different from individual to individual. But society is so obsessed with what are the patterns, because I want to learn from you and on you and you to figure out like, how can I get there better?
I mean, I want to let Steven go, but like I have thoughts exactly on what you're talking about. It's like there's a relativism between you and your expected you versus the relativism between you and your peers.
Yeah.
And I think that matters immensely.
Yeah, because the focus should be, how can I be better than yesterday? Myself yesterday.
Right.
And we've heard that, and it's been on a quote before on Instagram, but we don't actually acknowledge it fully and work toward that. We compare ourselves to our peers.
Because
of course,
if
and that
Warren
creates
Buffett
suffering.
if Warren Buffett woke up with my dollar amount tomorrow, he'd be like, what the fuck did I do wrong? But if like some guy in Cambodia woke up with my dollar amount, he'd be like, holy shit, I'm amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the only thing that matters is like, am I growing relatively on a macro level, not on a daily level? Like some days you have down days, but like on a macro year by year level versus like my old self.
Yeah, I think the happiness does come from growth. And again, I'm going back to my original definition, which is happiness is this fleeting thing. And you know it is a fleeting thing. But like when I look at my quarterly goal sheets and like I look back at them, I can look back on like over 10 years. I'm like, wow, like, you know, I'm healthier, I have more money, I have more freedom, like that kind of thing. And that progress feels good and it makes me happy. I do think your framework of like expectations and your reality is like a good framework for what I called peace, because it's a little more sustainable. And it's funny because like in personal development circles, there's like a hokey saying like trade your expectations for appreciation, I think is what is like a how-to version of that. But I like the way you phrased it better, because it gives a framework and a better perspective. So I like it.
I love that, Nick, because when you live in a reality of like too many expectations, you're overwhelmed by all the things that you wish would be. And when you trade that for gratitude, appreciation, you can't suffer. You literally can't. Like if your current like baseline feeling is gratitude, if you're experiencing a feeling of gratitude, you can't really experience a feeling of suffering in the same exact second. So that's why that trade of like, instead of expecting I'm going to accept, immediately can shift you toward acceptance. And life happens on a second by second, moment by moment basis. So if something is true in this second and in the present, then it is fundamentally true.
Yeah, and if you fight that expectation, you know, instead of accepting how things are, you get stuck with it. I had this like hilarious moment. I was listening to like Eckhart Tolle meditation, and he like himself started giggling. He's like, what you don't accept, you're stuck with, because you're going to fight it. So if you have this expectation of reaching something and your reality is not there, and you fight that over and over in your head, you're going to be stuck with it. But if you accept it for what it is, and maybe you still have a goal to do it, but accept that the reality is not that now, then it passes through.
He's an odd duck, man.
He's an odd bird.
He's
Steven,
so good.
you got
though.
anything? You've been pretty quiet over there.
I'm just trying to let you guys do your thing.
It's been 25 minutes. I want to hear from you.
Yeah. I mean, I've been sitting here listening, and I think what you guys are saying is all well and good. It's very spiritual.
Uh-oh.
It's very heady. I feel like we need to say some more concrete stuff, though.
All right.
You can.
I think what
Give us the concrete.
No, I'm in for that.
some specific alpha, maybe. I think what Eric is saying is true. It's sort of like a hack, right? There are some elements of being a human that are absolute, right? Like there is a scale between I'm full and I'm so hungry that I'm starving to death. The same as with being thirsty. There is no scale of happy, right? There's nothing to objectively measure that against, right? So what you're saying about happiness being a relative thing in some areas is true, and it's been confirmed in a lot of psychological experiments. Like if you own a $3 million home in a block where everybody has a $10 million home, you're going to be like way less happy than the guy who owns a $500,000 home on a block where everybody's home is $100,000.
That's true, and that's such a weird phenomenon, but that's true. That's.
I mean,
studies have
I
shown
would
that to
still
be true.
argue that neither of those people are happy, though. This is sort of just like the temporary kind of like getting high kind of happy thing. And I think what we're striving for is like a more long-term contentment type thing.
Good point.
I think You guys read Principles by Ray Dalio? It's one of those books that could have easily been a blog post, but instead it's like 1,300 pages, and it's like a little cringy at times. I don't want to hate on Ray; he's a great man. But like, there's one thing in there that stuck out with me, and he basically, to sum it up, said that like happiness is meaningful work and meaningful relationships. And I thought that was like a really nice, succinct like summation of what people should strive for in life. I think that what we're saying about like basically like the Buddha, right? If we remove everything, the default state of humanity is happiness. And if you get rid of all the possessions and you do all this, I think that's true, but also it's not a realistic thing for people. And I would argue like in some ways it can almost be selfish in a sense if you're just like isolating from the world and just trying to live in your bubble of happy and you sort of die. What about like suffering to raise a kid and all these, or to build a business, all these things where you make the world a better place. I think Ray would be better like if he added, instead of the meaningful work, meaningful relationships, I would add health onto there, and I would add like the removal of obstacles that prevent you from getting to that point. So like for me, what's worked for me to be happy, and I'm not like a super happy person, like I am very high in, I guess, neuroticism, to reference the prior episode. And I am by nature like sort of this is like actually an interesting topic of discussion we should talk about at some point. Like there are two types of humans in psychology. There are optimizers and satisficers, like to oversimplify it. Some people in this world are born, like Eric, satisficer. Me, optimizer. There are some people who climb a mountain and they go, all right, I need to climb a bigger mountain. They throw a baseball 99 miles an hour and they're like, fuck, I got to throw it 100 miles an hour. And like, no matter what, I made $1 million, or can I make $3 million? And you're programmed to climb the mountain, look at the next mountain. It's called horizoning. You just keep going and going and going and going. And if you're a satisficer, like Eric, like you would naturally be predisposed to being happy, because you will sort of like want for less. You'll be more content. And like wanting for less is like one of the classic stoicism like keys to happiness is just want for less. I mean, you've solved a bunch of your things, right? But if you're an optimizer like me, and anybody out there who's like listening, who's like me, like it's a struggle to be happy, because you are programmed to be like, okay, I did it, but like this isn't good enough. I have to keep going. It's like the very antithesis of like contentment. So for me, being like super self-aware of that, I think is like step one, right? That's like the first step of like, I am an alcoholic, right? And you have to.
Are you telling us?
Yeah. Well, I hope not, but I am an optimizer, and I like for me, when I was better at this in the past, and like this is definitely a do as I say, not as I do, because I am totally off the wagon right now. But what was good for me in the past was meditation, because it allowed me to clear a bunch of stuff off my brain that was like mental clutter, that was like you're not good enough, all these like kind of like impulses, and just sort of remove that and wipe that slate clean. I need to start doing that again now that I talk about it, because it's rough.
That's a topic that's been coming up a lot lately in like all my circles. Everyone's like, I need to meditate.
I know, we
It's
should
been
probably do
coming
a
up
full
lot.
like meditation episode.
We should. I really like what you're saying, Stephen. I think it's important to make things concrete at times for ourselves, to turn these ideas that are oftentimes like a little elusive into habits or real tangible things that we can exercise. And I'm a very logic-driven person, but this is an area of my life where I look at society, especially in the United States, and we haven't brought this up yet. So would you guys say the majority of people are happy?
No.
I think they're miserable.
Yeah.
And Naval has this really interesting saying where he goes, well, if you're so fucking smart, why don't you figure out how to be happy? And the first time I heard that, it kind of like was one of those like shocking, you have that moment where you're like, holy shit, this guy's he's so right. Like, if you're so successful in so many other areas, if you figured everything out, Why is it that this is the last thing that is so challenging for you to figure out? And I think it's because we're applying the same sort of frameworks that make us successful in the arena of things that are more concrete and tangible and scientific.
Like business or money.
Yeah, exactly. To something that is in deep inner game. And that's not meant to like disagree that we need to make it concrete. But I do think that this is a spiritual process. I do think that this is like an individual process that requires this cultivation and mindset of like acceptance of the self, acceptance of the present, acceptance of what is as a whole, while still pursuing these like grand things. And I am, I totally agree with the optimizer. Like, I think I'm someone who constantly wants to be better, to do more, to move to the next thing. But there comes a time where I think I had to sit down and ask myself, like, well, not just what is enough, but how do I use this as a tool where I don't have to suffer while I'm in pursuit of getting better, if that makes sense? Like, if I'm going to constantly optimize to be a better human, how do I enjoy the journey more along the way? And that's where I landed on, well, it is this aim, but yet with the acceptance of what is, regardless of my expectations. And to your bud, Eckhart Tolle, probably the best thing I've ever learned on this topic is from him. For me, like A New Earth, that book is fundamentally one of the most powerful books I've ever read, much more than Power of Now. And I don't know why. I think he fucking inceptioned that book with something special. I believe books contain real energy that is beyond anything that we can measure. And what I got out of that was something just magnificent. And the thing that has stayed, there are many things that have stayed with me, but the most important one was, if you are not friends with the present, imagine that the present moment, whatever is happening around you, is bothering you. That's like step one for most people. It's like stressful. Well, that means that the present moment is definitely not your friend. Best case scenario, it's like an obstacle. So then all of a sudden what happens is that everything in your life is kind of like an obstacle. You're always in pursuit of like, if I just solve this, then I'll be happy. For some people, that darkness goes so dark and goes so deep that it goes from just that the present moment is an obstacle to the present moment becomes like your enemy. Everything about life is just terrible and miserable. And I think that's the condition of most of society today. When I look around, I don't see happy people for the most part. I see them in pockets. I see them in certain circles. I see them around the people that I try to be around. But like in general, you don't see most people like have cultivated happiness or peace or fulfillment or contentment. You see suffering. You see most people are like, the way life is wrong. The world is wrong. Everything is wrong and it's not right and it's not the way I want it to be. But imagine if the present moment was not just your friend, which means you accept it, but your best friend. Imagine if, regardless of what was happening, you accepted it for everything it is. And I've been thinking about this because that was a really complex thing that we brought up in the early part of the conversation around loss or around something tragic that happens. I think that the answer to that has been, it's not like, oh, I'm happy in the face of that, but it's being able to accept it and find peace in it and acknowledging like everything that was and focusing on how the memories can continue to survive to a certain degree, because it's for all of us. And I think for me, like a quick right turn, the thing that most people don't spend enough time thinking about and talking about is their own mortality. I think I think most of the suffering in society is due to a lack of recognition and acceptance of their own mortality. If people walked around with the idea that they were going to die in 6 months, would they choose acceptance, peace, fulfillment, contentment, and happiness for this moment? Or would they choose to turn the present moment into an obstacle or their enemy? That's something that I always have in the back of my mind, is like, if death was sitting on my shoulder, if this was my last conversation with this person, if this was my last podcast, how would I show up? What would I say? What would I do? That can create happiness. That's like a tool to accept. And I think that we're all scared of that. And I understand why. It's a very taboo topic in the West. So I think about these aspects a lot.
It's also tough because I agree with you that it's a spiritual process, but I think like, those sayings are tough to turn into a system. And I think you can turn, happiness or peace into a system to like create more of it on like a daily or weekly basis. And like, I think the easy ones to get off the table are like the typical type A things that we talk about, or probably the listeners talk about, which is like have goals, accomplish them, make money. Most certainly it doesn't necessarily give you happiness, but I think it solves a lot of pain, solves a lot of problems and like troubles in your life, and it could give you freedom. But like two things that have like, I think systematized some of the spiritual parts, at least for me. Number one has been, and I think this is going to be like a lifelong thing, is trying to disassociate my thoughts from my identity. So like thoughts are just like constantly whirling in your brain. Even while we're recording this podcast, there is a second track going on in your mind that constantly happens. And that thought process is like super neurotic, super anxious, paranoid at times. It's like ADD, like, a cat chasing a ball. And it's crazy. And if there was a fifth person that was like saying the things that was going on in our heads right next to us, we couldn't stand that person for like 10 minutes. You'd be insane. You'd be like, this guy's clinical. And so that is like constantly going on in our brains, and going through the practice of like being aware that this is a thought process that goes in my head, but it is not me. It is this thing that is happening, and I am the observer of those thoughts, but I am not those thoughts. So when the brain starts getting anxious or mad or jealous, I am observing the jealousy come to my mind, and you might just say, that's interesting. Like my brain is having jealous thoughts right now, but I am not the jealousy. That's
from the
Very good
Untethered
framework.
Soul.
most definitely. Like if you want to dive into that, who
Or
explains
Eckhart
it the
Tolle.
best?
He does
Eckhart
a very good
Tolle
job of
or
that, too.
the Untethered Soul.
Even Sam Harris
I've heard
talks about this, but
Yeah.
Untethered Soul is the book I would highly recommend to go down this
He
process.
that author described to me very clearly that there is the voice and then there is the observer that you're describing. I want to touch on one other thing, which I think is important, is like a lot of happiness can be like microtransactions. If we're talking about like crypto gaming or something, it's like if you smile at somebody, if you're like nice to a barista, if you like just like walk by somebody and you don't have a scowl on your face, like those microtransactions of happiness can have a compounding effect on reality at large, I think, where it's like it starts within you, maybe for like what you guys are saying, where you have like the Eckhart Tolle, whatever. It's like it starts within you, but if you're good to people around you, then perhaps it's a domino effect where they're then good to the next transaction they have, and then it creates a domino effect down the line where it's like we can all kind of be better to each
Super
other.
true.
And like it doesn't take that much.
I mean, I think it sometimes just comes down to like you're no longer sitting around doing the woe is me. You're not sitting like suffering with your thoughts. You're like focused on how can I make this person happy, or how can I do something to contribute. Sometimes all it takes to feel a little better is to like focus on other people. Like just getting outside of your head, like how can I make Stephen happy today? I'm gonna show up with like a special whatever, whiskey or whatever. I don't know. Like sometimes that's all it takes, because then you just go, okay, like I don't have the time, the energy, the ability to focus my present moment on like my problem, and you immediately get out of the way and you start contributing. Contribution is like a huge mechanism toward happiness. And honestly, a lot of these thoughts, I think the like actionable behavior based things that we can do to feel happier, many of them do work really, really well. And like they became popularized in the last 10, 15 years. Like I remember when Gretchen Rubin first wrote the book on happiness, and then that caused like 27 million other books to be written on happiness. And like every new author was like the happiness project, the happiness this, the bliss project. I'm curious if, what you guys think about the idea of knowledge and ignorance in general. Does ignorance, like the idea of ignorance is bliss, the idea of more knowledge can create more pain. Where do you guys stand on that? Do you think there's a line to like self-knowledge, to self-growth? Do you think that at a certain point, if you become ignorant of certain problems in life, that you actually achieve more happiness?
I like it paired with Eric's like model, which is I don't think you want to like intentionally become ignorant. You do want to like seek knowledge, But in order to be happy within that framework, you need to pair it with the skill that Eric is talking about, which is like, setting expectations appropriately, or knowing that your happiness is relative to the expectations. So just because you know that there is a better car that exists than the car you have, that shouldn't necessarily make you happy or unhappy if you kind of are grounded in what I think the model Eric was talking about.
What do you think, Bud?
Yeah, I mean, you can always find a reason to be unhappy or happy. I don't think we should focus our energy on stuff that like is going to make us less happy. And of course that exists.
Are you referring to ignorance, like that?
No, well, sure. Like knowledge acquisition. It to your model from 2-3 episodes ago is like that can be happiness in its own right.
Sure can.
It's autotelic.
Yeah.
So like acquisition of knowledge can be okay.
Can be blissful.
Can be blissful.
Yeah.
So like acquire more knowledge. That can be great. I don't think you're wrong on that.
I often think about the whole ignorance is bliss thing because some of the most happy people I see are pretty ignorant. Like they're the ones that are like living in a bubble in the middle of nowhere and they don't have any clue what's going on outside of that bubble and they're really, really happy.
But
and I'm like, damn, do I know too much?
Perhaps they're
that's
not.
What I'm referring to.
Perhaps they're not.
It's mostly because they're satisficers.
I think it's
honestly.
because they don't have the expectation. It's like they can have knowledge without expectation.
Yeah, they don't have this like constant optimization growth path that they're on, you're saying.
Yeah, like some people are born just being very acutely aware of the alternatives and they weigh all of the things that could be that they see around them, even the theoretical things in the future. And it's a powerful motivator, but it's also like a really difficult trap for people. And honestly, I think people who are like naturally born satisficers don't have to do a lot to be happy. I just think their default state allows them to be happier by default. But I do feel for all the optimizers out there, the chronic, the type of people who are like to be like high achievers, entrepreneurs, like people who are great. There's a reason why those people are like really unhappy a lot of the time.
Yeah,
it's like
so
such a double-edged
Stephen,
sword.
I think we probably agree on this. I think we're going to agree on this, but do you think how much of this do you think comes down to personality and psychology and how like you're basically saying that to a certain degree, but when you look at like this entire population of the globe, we talked about this, like certain percentage of people are just more conscientious, neurotic, whatever it might be. How much of that do you think factors into just like overall measurement of happiness and fulfillment and peace that a person can ever find in their life?
I think it's huge. I think it's an enormous thing, but I don't think it's something that can't be overcome.
Yeah.
I think that like much like somebody who is prone to obesity has to work harder
Yeah.
on their diet. Somebody who is prone to being like a overly neurotic optimizer has to be more conscious of like what is driving them to be unhappy. And like I think personally I've noticed in myself that the first step for me is like observing. Like I feel like oftentimes when I'm unhappy, like without knowing it, I've like entered like this huge like automated habit loop. And like the more like I feel like I'm not getting a goal I want, the more I obsessively just get in this rut and I'm just on this habit loop and I go round and round and round. So for me, the first step has been to like just wake up and take a step back and be like, oh my God, I'm on this like treadmill. I think I have like autonomy over my life and I'm making all these conscious decisions, and I'm like consciously doing things that aren't making me happy. But in reality, I'm like falling into this variety of like addictive pathways and habits that are causing me to do things that are not making me happy. So that's like step one is like the awareness that you're just doing these things automatically. And I think step two for me has been to like take a step back and think about like, what do I have control over and what do I not have control over? You know,
because that's my question to you as a satisficer to an optimizer. My question to you is like, you want to get better at playing tennis, right? We play tennis on Tuesdays.
Yeah, until he stopped.
Until he stopped. Okay,
God
but either way,
damn it.
So he wants to play tennis on Tuesdays. He's probably unsatisfied.
I'm gonna get you a shot of PRP,
But my question is like,
and he'll be back.
okay, so you're unsatisfied with the level of tennis you're playing, but like, do you not have an expectation level that says like you're not going to be Pete Sampras? Or in your mind, are you like, no, I'm better than Pete Sampras? Like,
No, I'm not talking about a dissatisfaction in the area of a specific task, although that does happen a little bit. Like I am hard on myself, like with my music and anything I do. I'm just naturally hard on myself. But I think being unhappy in a general sense sort of transcends how you might feel about one skill. It's like a spillover effect of like discontent that like I think the meaningful relationships and meaningful work thing is like huge. I think if you have those two things, you could be happy. But the caveat to that, I think, is you have to like also not have some sort of addiction or habit loop, because I think there are people who have meaningful work and meaningful relationships, but they have some compulsion or habit loop or addiction that gets in there and prevents those things from kind of like firing. And a lot of people's happiness, if they have those two things, will revolve around like removing that addiction. And there are people who like I feel discontent all the time, right? Like I'm not like super happy right now, right? I'm like my life's good and everything, but I'm not like euphorically happy like Eric over here.
Well,
but I know
happy either.
I'm being sarcastic, but like compared to me, maybe you are. But I know that isn't. But I know why that is. Like I've like isolated what I need as a person. Like I really need the meaningful work thing. That's one of the reasons this pod has been so great for me, is because it's like inserted some of this like meaning into my day to day. Like I'm good at trading, I'm good at crypto, I'm good at investing, I'm good at like drawing lines on charts, but it's like not meaningful to me. So that like doing that does leave like a huge like gap in my day and my general life. Like I need, and I know that until I fill that, like I'm not going to ascend to some level of like higher contentment or happiness.
That was pretty good.
It's a great point. It's like, does a lot of happiness for a lot of people come down to just like having meaningful things, meaningful work, meaningful relationship,
Something that came out in our Discord.
Yeah.
And it came up, a lot of people who were listening came through the Bankless episode. And I think we talked about it, that Harvard Grant study shows that like long lasting happiness comes from meaningful relationships. And that is like the sole thing that, can determine lifelong happiness.
No doubt.
Yeah,
big time.
That's number one hack, I think. And for people out there who don't have that in person, because I think a lot of people don't, and I imagine that can be really isolating. You don't live in a city with like millions of people like we do, where you can just find somebody down the road who believes stuff you do. I mean, it's great that we have the internet now, and if you're feeling like lonely and isolated, like you can find people out there online who are real people. They're just like digital avatars a little bit, but they like the things you like and they believe the things you believe. And like, I feel like that's such a great stand-in for people that we haven't had before, even though the internet has done a lot of bad things with social media. But I think that's been like a really nice good. And this is like a shameless plug for our Discord, but like if you feel like you listen to this and you kind of vibe with what we're saying and you like with what we're saying, we got a whole tribe of that, and we talk about this stuff all the time, and we hang out, and it's great. It's great for me. Like I love going in there and talking to people and just engaging with stuff. It like really feels so good to me, as opposed to just sitting in the coffee shop by myself, like on my laptop, just grinding on some work like I used to do.
I feel so connected to these people. It actually is like an extension of this friend group, and feels amazing to have that community. I couldn't agree more. And you find it in different places. That's one place to find it. Boys, this has been a fantastic episode. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Curious everyone else's thoughts in the community around happiness. This is a great topic to have a discussion around. We'd really, really be curious what you guys think of our takes, your take. What is your perspective on happiness? Hop in our Discord, let us know, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Peace.
Yeah.